Glue Reaper signing in here. Follow along as I build this 1/35th scale tree step by step. I went for a walk in the park to try to find some specimens. I took a lot of video reference of this tree to help later when I'm trying to sculpt. I don't really have a plan diorama for this tree. In the future, it'll probably be something of significant size to try to fit it on. The first tree I did was looking promising until I dropped it and it shattered. It was made out of twisted wire and plaster of Paris. It was turning out to be a little bit more difficult to try to save it than just to try to start a new one. So I basically did a trial tree just to see what things I can improve upon and new techniques I could come up with. And this one basically turned out pretty well, so I started to go with the same techniques but just improved. I went with a German-made product called Bees Putty. It's basically a polymer clay. Right out of the package, it's very firm, so I decided to cut it into small squares so it would be easier to manipulate. After getting the clay nice and soft, cutting into small squares, I basically forced it around the twisted wire. At this stage, I'm basically just trying to get it to adhere to the wire as best as possible. I did not manage to film the stage where I twisted the wire together, but it's basically the thickness of a coat hanger, and I used copper wire and twisted it with two separate trunks coming off of it. I basically keep a scale figure that I'm working on currently close by just to approximate the scale of what the tree size is going to be. And now I'm just blending the clay and roughing in the basic shapes. After roughing in the basic shapes, I take an X-Acto knife and shave down some of the high spots, keeping in mind that trees have a very gradual transition from the very base of the trunk to the very top of the tree. An old credit card works great for smoothing out the knife marks from the X-Acto. Hand cream is also a great smoothing technique to get rid of fingerprints. And back to the hand cream to get rid of fingerprints and tool marks. Studying my reference photos, I noticed sycamore trees don't have a huge root base, so I went with just a hint of one. For the bark of the tree, I was testing out some new techniques, a small bit of putty, flattening it out, and using a stylus and just a finger. This worked out so well that I'll probably be using this for most trees in the future. Basically, instead of sculpting the bark into the main tree all in one stage, it turned out to be a lot easier to sculpt the bark to the tree that was already cured. This tree has a lot of random bark scattered all over, so I basically just matched it from the reference photos. This was probably my favorite part of the whole build. And now using a smaller stylus for more textured surfaces. After getting the basic bark attached to the tree, I moved on to some more features that were on the exteriors of the tree. The trees that I was studying had these burls basically all over them, most likely branches breaking off or wounds healing over. So I just copied what I saw in the reference photos and textured them with a stylus, the larger stylus, and then working my way down to the smaller one. This adds some more visual interest to the tree. So into the oven for a bake session. After taking it out of the oven, I noticed the base of the trunk had a large crack. Only thing I can think of that it was basically the super glue expanding in the oven. So I decided for strength to go with Magic Sculpt on the very tips of the largest branches of the tree. This was just for extra strength because basically this putty is extremely hard when it dries. Even though for most of the tree I went with bees putty, I chose to go with an epoxy putty that's self-curing, just because the bees putty does have a lot of flex, and being that I'm going to be putting a lot of branches on here, I didn't want it to sag or droop. So for the rest of the branches of the tree, they needed to be pre-formed with a lot of randomness. I basically achieved that with lightly crumpled aluminum foil to hold the random shapes of the branches. Another new method to add to the book of methods. I usually bake bees putty at 220 or 280 degrees Fahrenheit. To basically cut them to fit the tree, we go back to the X-Acto knife. I cut a cup shape basically to fit the contours of the trunk. Using super glue to attach it to the trunk and kicker to set the glue faster. There's basically plenty of length on these branches, so lots of room for error. If you cut the shape a little bit wrong, you can just cut it more and more and more till you get it right. And printing out the photos I found online also helped to decide basically the angles I wanted to achieve and to copy basically the tree itself. After getting all the desired branches attached to the main tree, I wanted a better transition to the main trunk. So using Magic Sculpt in small amounts, I blended the two together. adding slight texture to help with the transition of the two. So now on to paint. Basically a field that I could definitely improve upon. So Tamiya is a go-to paint for most large projects that I do, and I chose to go with XF64, XF12, and XF2. So I added 3 drops of XF64 to tone down the bright white, and 3 drops of XF12 for a slight tinge of gray. Painting a tree like this can feel like you're painting a chain link fence with this amount of wasted paint, but it's just a necessary evil. So now that you've coated your entire workspace with a thin layer of white overspray, on to the fun part, painting the camouflage to the tree. The first layer, I chose to go with XF83 and a 3.0 brush. So I chose a tree as far as color that I liked, and I just went with it. So painting small oval-like shapes was basically what felt right, so I went with that. Based on the reference, there was large sections of just straight white bark, so I did leave some patchy areas out to give it that look. And as you go up the tree, the white bark becomes more prominent, so it's a gradual transition from thick paint at the bottom and then working your way up to less and less and less. At this stage, it's really starting to look like a sycamore tree. The next color I chose was XF72, and how fitting to be using brown to paint a tree. This process was slightly different than the last. Now we are trying to hunt out all those beautiful bark textures and paint those brown with slight blending with a couple dots here and there between the gray and the brown. I basically could have gone with more colors to this tree, but I chose to keep it somewhat simple as far as colors. So using any type of matte varnish to suppress any shine from fingerprints. Basically, there's a little bit of shine to the Tamiya paint, so this will cut that back. And on to something I can't wait to share with you guys is the seafoam trees. And always back to your reference. This tree in winter can give you lots of insight to its branch structures, which does help. You can use the seafoam branches basically right out of the package as is, but I discovered something interesting about them. They have these small seed-like flowers on them that when lightly rubbed with your fingers basically dislodge themselves from the plant, making it look way more realistic. This technique does require a gentle touch. You will basically lose some branches, but it's a sacrifice that is well worth it. And as you can see, this comparison is a stark difference. And now just 500 more to go, and we'll be one step closer to the finish line. They would also look great as winter branches, maybe a future video. We'll see. So green stuff makes these leaf punches that basically resemble the sycamore's leaves, and perfect because they sell it in 2 different sizes, which is perfect for this situation. So these punches were put to the test in probably the most extreme way possible, with a lot of use. So the paper that I went with is basically the same type of paper you would get in a gift bag, and you can go online and buy it in whatever color you want. So this turned out to be the perfect material for the leaves. Not too thick and not too thin. So 20,000 leaves later and many sleepless nights, the tree is almost ready for foliage. But first we need to paint those branches that we had prepped earlier. The same white mixture we used to paint the main trunk of the tree to do the branches as well. So using XF52, I added a light brown to all the tips of the branches. This is to resemble new growth to all the branches. So I decided to add all the leaves first. This is so I can focus on like a full coverage of each one of the branches. A tacky matte adhesive has always worked well in the past, so this will help basically grab each one of the leaves, and because they're thin, they stick a lot easier than thicker if you use thicker paper. They are really starting to look good now. So here I am just posing where branches are going to be. This will help determine ultimately how tall the tree will end up. So I started from the tallest branch or highest branch of the tree and then worked my way down. So I also used kicker here to prevent my arm from falling off. So just finding a desired angle, trimming the branch, and then attaching. Some have angles that can help basically orient the angle that you really need from that position. And also trimming them down a little bit so that they're not too long. So most of the inner branches were placed first, so they aren't hard to reach as things start to bulk up on the tree. And now for the finished tree. So I'm extremely happy with the way that this tree turned out. I'm glad you watched up until this point. For the future of this channel, I will be making more in-depth tutorials. Eventually starting a Patreon with lots more information on my tips and tricks. Once again, thanks for watching, and Glue Reaper out.